The Tempest by William Shakespeare. The Tempest is generally regarded as one of Shakespeare's final plays and his last romance. It is believed to have been written in the year 1610 and was first performed in 1611 for King James I and again for the marriage festivities of Elizabeth, the king's daughter. Scholars attribute the immediate source of the play to the 1609 shipwreck of an English ship in Bermuda. It was first printed in the 1623 collection of Shakespeare's plays, now known as the First Folio. The play is commonly classified with Pericles, The Winter's Tale and Cymbeline in a small group of plays called romances. As one of his final plays and as a romance, The Tempest displays Shakespeare's genius for both tragedy and comedy. Serious themes and scenes are developed alongside more light-hearted comic ones. Like most of Shakespeare's romances, The Tempest deal with magic, love, marriage, plots to gain or regain political power, the discovery of new lands, and the relationship between nature and civilization. Finally, it moves towards achieving reconciliation and regeneration. Characters in the play The Tempest. Prospero is the rightful Duke of Milan who has magical powers. He has a 15-year-old daughter, Miranda, and rules over spirits like Ariel and savages like Caliban. Antonio is Prospero's brother who has usurped his dukedom 12 years before the story begins. He plots with Sebastian to murder Alonso and Gonzalo. Miranda is Prospero's daughter, a naive young girl who falls in love with Ferdinand. Gonzalo is an honest old counselor to the King of Naples. He helped save Prospero when he was overthrown by his brother. Alonso is the King of Naples who was involved in the plot that cost Prospero his dukedom. He is the father of Ferdinand. Ferdinand is the son of Alonso. He falls in love with Miranda at first sight. Sebastian is Alonso's brother. He is power-hungry and corrupt, one who later plots to murder his brother Alonso and Gonzalo. Caliban, a deformed savage, is the son of a witch and the slave of Prospero. Trinculo is Alonso's drunken jester. He gets involved in a comic conspiracy with Stefano and Caliban to kill Prospero and take over the island. Stefano, a drunken butler, whom Caliban worships as a god. Ariel is a spirit under Prospero's command. Then there are other spirits like Iris, Ceres, Juno, nymphs, reapers. There is master of a ship, boatswain, mariners, Adrian and Francisco are the lords. This is Freytag's pyramid that will help you to understand the 5 stages of the plot development of The Tempest. In Act 1, you will find the exposition. In the first act of The Tempest, we see Prospero, the former Duke of Milan, with the aid of the spirit Ariel, raises a storm. It is at this time that a group of nobles, including Alonso, King of Naples, Sebastian, the king's brother, Ferdinand, the king's son, Gonzalo, a loyal counselor, and Antonio, Prospero's brother, is voyaging from Tunis to Naples. From a nearby island, Prospero and his daughter Miranda watch the ship. Miranda worries about the ship's passengers. She suspects that her father has created the storm using his magical powers and begs him to calm the waters. Prospero then reveals to Miranda the details of their past. He tells her how 12 years ago, when she was only 5, his brother Antonio betrayed and overthrew him. With the help of Alonso, Antonio arranged for Prospero and Miranda to be kidnapped and set adrift at sea. Now Prospero says circumstances allow him to take revenge on his enemies and he wishes to regain his dukedom. All the travelers are cast ashore on the island where Prospero has been living with his daughter Miranda and a servant named Caliban. The play's central conflict is introduced. Prospero wishes to regain his dukedom, which was usurped by his brother Antonio with the help of Alonso. Prospero was partially to blame for his own downfall because he devoted all his time to the study of the magical arts. A number of other conflicts are also introduced, such as the conflict between Prospero and Caliban, Caliban who resents serving Prospero. In his act, we see Ferdinand's separation from his father, whom he presumes to be dead. Prospero desires to form a match between Miranda and Ferdinand. Ferdinand, Alonso's son, lured by Ariel's song, catches sight of Miranda and falls in love with her. Miranda too falls in love with him. Thus, all the major characters of the play are introduced in the first act. The complication or the rising action takes place in Act 2. In the second act, the central conflict is developed. Alonso is presented as mourning the loss of his son Ferdinand, whom he believes to have been drowned. The treachery described in Act 1 continues in Act 2 also. Antonio hatches a new scheme. He instigates Sebastian to kill Alonso and claim the kingdom of Naples. He also convinces him to murder Gonzalo. However, Antonio's project, to which Sebastian has fully agreed, is foiled by Ariel singing a song to awaken Gonzalo. Another conflict is further developed when Caliban encounters Alonso's butler, Stefano, and jester, Trinculo, and decides to make them his new masters to free himself from Prospero's service. In Act 3, we find the heightening of the complication and the climax. The third act presents a decisive occurrence. It determines the future course of events in the play. In Act 3 of The Tempest, Prospero has set Ferdinand to the task of moving 1,000 logs. Miranda pities and encourages him. They profess their love to each other and pledge to marry. In another scene of the same act, Caliban convinces Stefano to kill Prospero, marry Miranda, and become king of the island. Their conspiracy is interrupted by Ariel's sweet music. He overhears their scheme. A bit later, Antonio and Sebastian resume their plot against Alonso. Prospero sends spirits in strange shapes to set a banquet before Alonso, Antonio, and Sebastian. Just as they are about to eat, Ariel appears as a harpy and makes the banquet disappear, saying the disappearance is a sign of their sin. He calls them 3 men of sin. Ariel also tells Alonso that Ferdinand is dead. He accuses them of overthrowing Prospero and says that only sincere repentance can save them now. Alonso immediately repents. Antonio and Sebastian pledge to fight back, but Prospero soon enchants and traps them all. The following action takes place in Act 4. The fourth act presents events that happen as a result of the climax or crisis. In this act, Prospero offers Ferdinand Miranda's hand in marriage and summons spirits to perform an elaborate masque for the couple. Let me tell you that masque is a brief allegorical drama lavish in spectacle and performed by masked actors. Suddenly, Prospero remembers Caliban's plot to murder him. He abruptly ends the masque and, with Ariel's help, tricks and then chases off the 3 conspirators. Thus, Prospero and Ariel put a stop to Caliban, Stefano, and Trinculo's scheme. Resolution or denouement takes place in Act 5. The fifth act presents the event that resolves or ends the central conflict. It also ties up loose ends. Prospero decides that rather than taking revenge, he will instead give up his magic and forgive his enemies. He presents himself to them in the robes he wore as Duke of Milan. The courtiers stand astounded at this sight. Alonso apologizes and restores Prospero's dukedom to him, though Antonio remains silent. Prospero reveals that Alonso's son Ferdinand is not dead at all, but happily engaged to Miranda. Prospero summons Stefano, Trinculo, and Caliban and exposes them to general scorn. Caliban says that he was wrong to plot against Prospero. Prospero then charges Ariel to ensure a safe voyage back to Italy for all, and then grants Ariel his freedom. Satisfied with regaining his lost dukedom, Prospero renounces his magic. The play ends with Prospero's epilogue, in which he asks the audience to applaud and set him free. Structure and plot construction of the play. The Tempest has a compact and close-knit structure. In it, Shakespeare has observed the three famous unities of ancient classical drama, that of the unities of time, place, and action. The unity of time requires that the action of a play should occur over a period of not more than 24 hours. In The Tempest, the action of the play does not extend over more than 3 hours. The unity of place requires that the action of the play should not shift from place to place, but should occur at the same location. In The Tempest, the entire action occurs on Prospero's island. The unity of action requires that there should be a single plot in a play. In almost all the plays of Shakespeare, the unity of action has been violated. In The Tempest also, we do not have a single plot. There is one main plot which relates to Prospero's treatment of his enemies and 2 or 3 subplots, namely the courtship and marriage of Ferdinand and Miranda, the intrigue hatched by Caliban against Prospero's life, and the intrigue hatched by Antonio and Sebastian against the lives of Alonso and Gonzalo. Although there are several threads, the play produces a unified effect. The play, on a closer examination, would be found to possess the following structure, of which I have already talked about in my second slide. Act 1, we find the exposition. Act 2, the complication takes place. The complications are intensified in Act 3. In Act 4, the complication reaches a crisis point, and the resolution takes place in Act 5. Prospero is the most important character in the play. In fact, he dominates the play from beginning to the end. After we have finished reading the play, the character that remains for the longest period of time in our memory is Prospero. Prospero has been the rightful Duke of Milan. He was more devoted to his books, to the study of liberal arts, and to the practice of magic than to governing his kingdom. He was overthrown and exiled by his brother Antonio and Alonso, the king of Naples. Prospero had lived for 12 years with his daughter Miranda on a deserted island, where he had become a powerful enchanter and the master of the spirit Ariel and the monster Caliban. His magical skill gave him almost complete control over anyone on the island. In fact, Prospero's power on the island was so complete that many critics compare him to an author of a play. Just as an author controls the actions of the characters in a play, Prospero controlled the actions of the people on the island. Prospero is domineering and expects gratitude and devotion from both his daughter and his servants. Yet, he is not bloodthirsty. At the end of the play, instead of taking revenge on those who wronged him, when he had them at his mercy, he chooses to forgive and reconcile with his enemies. His whole treatment of Ariel throughout the play shows Prospero's essentially gentle and affectionate nature, though at times he is stern and harsh. He is full of sympathy for Gonzalo also. Prospero's love for his daughter Miranda is perhaps the most striking aspect of his character, apart from his exercise of his supernatural powers. He looks after his daughter and is very protective of her. Even though he seems to have set up the meeting between Miranda and Ferdinand, Prospero still makes Ferdinand work hard to prove that he is worthy of Miranda's love. He is the very embodiment of wisdom. After having attained supernatural powers, he becomes a kind of philosopher who understands that the world in which we live is an illusion and we must not give too much importance to it. The lines, "We are such stuff as dreams are made on, and our little life is rounded with a sleep," are so full of wisdom. Despite certain divine qualities, Prospero suffers from certain faults and imperfections. At times we find him irritable, impatient, and harsh in his behavior. The next character that I have taken up for analysis is Caliban. Although Caliban is a subsidiary character so far as the main plot is concerned, but in point of interest and in respect of significance, he is an outstanding figure. Caliban is the son of the witch Sycorax. He is a strange and monstrous creature, partially human, partially beast. He is Prospero's slave. Although Prospero had treated him affectionately and tried to teach him language, Caliban proved most ungrateful and showed his inherent beastly side by trying to harm Miranda. He even plans to kill Prospero. He remains a brute, but an eloquent brute. His speeches are forceful and effective. Caliban is furious and bitter and wants nothing more than to rid himself of Prospero. Through Caliban and his relationship with Prospero, Shakespeare explores the themes of colonization and the relationship between the colonizer and the colonized. Shakespeare gives Caliban some complexity, with the result that the character has drawn much critical attention, both in contrast to Ariel and Ferdinand. Let us discuss the theme of the play. One of the leading themes of the Tempest is the pursuit of power and the exercise of power. Indeed, this theme is all-pervasive. Several characters in the play are shown in possessing a strong desire for attaining power and for asserting them. The love of power is more strikingly seen in Antonio, in Alonso, and even in Stefano. Then there are two characters who are all-powerful, Prospero and Ariel. The play also talks about the power which Sycorax possessed. In fact, the whole story centers around the theme of attaining power and the exercise of that power. But of course, the power which is pursued or exercised manifests itself in various ways. The next theme is the theme of regeneration, forgiveness, and reconciliation. This is a striking feature of the play, and Prospero, with all his magical skills and supernatural powers, could have inflicted any kind of punishment upon his enemies who conspired to overthrow him. But during the 12 years which he had spent upon the island, he not only acquired supernatural powers, but also the wisdom. Prospero had no intention to make those sinners suffer physical or mental torture beyond a certain limit. He says that his main purpose is to make the three sinners realize the gravity of their offense which they had committed against him and his daughter 12 years ago, and he tells Ariel, the rarer action is in virtue than in vengeance. He forgives them all. Then it is chiefly Alonso who thinks his son has been drowned and has undergone the process of regeneration. Prospero confronts Alonso directly and reminds him of his crime. Alonso genuinely repents and restores the dukedom of Milan to Prospero. A full reconciliation takes place between Prospero and his enemies after he reminds them of their crime, and then he pronounces his forgiveness upon them. The Tempest as a romance. The Tempest employs the basic romance materials. It begins with a shipwreck. All the passengers are cast ashore. King Alonso is separated from his son Ferdinand and believes him dead. The love affair between Ferdinand and Miranda is typically romantic. An air of unreality pervades the play. The whole action of the story is governed by the supernatural powers of Prospero operating through Ariel, a spirit of the air. This play is romantic also because of its echoes of the spirit of adventure of the Elizabethan age. The Tempest is often regarded by some critics as a tragicomedy. Throughout this play, tragic events are quickly followed by amusing situations and vice versa. In the very opening scene, we have a combination of this kind. The shipwreck, the desperation of the passengers is contrasted with Gonzalo's amusing remarks on the boatswain. Then there is sadness when Prospero gives his daughter a detailed account of the misfortunes which they had to experience as a consequence of the conspiracy of the three sinners. A mixture of sorrow and mirth can be witnessed in Act 2. Act 3 begins with Ferdinand and Miranda exchanging vows of love and loyalty. This romantic scene is followed by a comic scene in which Caliban, Stefano, Trinculo enter into an amusing discussion with Ariel playing a trick to create a misunderstanding among them. Act 5 has a large component of serious and painful developments, though the whole thing ends happily with forgiveness and reconciliation. With this, I end the discussion on The Tempest. Thank you and have a nice day.